Welcome to the Modern CPA Success Show, where we're 100% focused on helping accounting firms achieve success. If you're an accounting firm owner who wants to learn how to grow your firm by providing virtual CFO services, then this podcast is for you.
Welcome to today's episode. I'm Tom Wadelton. I am a virtual CFO with Summit CPA Group. That's a division of Anders CPA and Advisors. Jody Grunden is helping me facilitate today's conversation. Jody's a partner at Anders CPA and Advisors. Jody, welcome today.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. This has been like one of the first ones I've been with.
It has, yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
So
yeah,
it'll be nice chatting.
And our guest today is Dan Rutherford. Dan is also one of my peers as a virtual CFO, and Dan has a lot of experience in the transportation and logistics industries, and that's kind of the big topic area today. Dan, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what brought you to Summit CPA Group?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jody. Looking forward to talking a little bit about transportation today. So I started my career out with IRS. Oddly enough, I was a revenue agent for over 11 years.
You never told me that.
I was a life of the. I wasn't invited to too many parties, Jody. So believe it or not. So I had 11 years or 11 and a half years with IRS. Good career. Got a good tax background, and I still have a decent. I still migrate back to that a little bit. And then ended up in public accounting for about a year as a tax manager. And then, oddly enough, a friend of the family reached out to me. His business was growing, and they were getting to that, kind of like we see a lot of our clients, getting to that kind of anxious feeling that, hey, we got a lot of questions and don't always have the answers. So he thought he needed a little more firepower in the accounting realm. So he reached out to me, and we'd gone to lunch and stuff over time. So he's always picking my brain and got to know me. But he brought me into the transportation industry, and that was, I don't know, it's been 22, 23 years ago. So I started with one company here in the Fort Wayne area, and then kind of did a little bit what Summit does on a very, very small scale. I ended up working with two different trucking companies for the next 20 some years, and kind of floated between them. As I guess I was a little virtual CFO and didn't know it at the time. And oddly enough, they knew each other. They weren't really competitors, and it worked for them, on the scale that I was doing it on. We shared ideas and stuff, and kind of like we do with a lot of our clients. So yeah, I had 20 some years in the industry. The last 3 or 4 years, I actually jumped from the CFO role into operations, which was kind of a nice break for me. I ran a large logistics division for the company, and we were a $120 some million division. Wow. And I had a lot of fun with that, and got indoctrinated in a lot of managing people and growing from. You kind of got a little break from accounting, which was kind of nice at the time. So.
Tons of experience. Geez, the IRS thing, I never would probably say that ever again. But
I'm envisioning the parties of people totally stopping talking as soon as you say that and just run.
Yeah. Like everybody's like, quit talking. Yeah, everybody tuned out right away.
And Jody, I found it funny when I was talking to
we have public accounting, IRS, and then corporate. So you have experience in all three areas. That's pretty amazing.
And then I actually came to Summit. My daughter, as Jody and Tom worked for Summit years ago, and I was really intrigued. She was kind of doing, and I was intrigued with the company. I'm like, that really sounds kind of what I wanted to do years ago. A friend of mine and I, we were planning to kind of do the same thing on a smaller scale. So as I heard conversation with her, I'm like, that's a really cool model. So I reached out to Summit this past summer, and ended up here 5 or 6 months ago, and really enjoyed it. It's been a fun ride.
Yeah, definitely fortunate to have you here for sure. I mean, you've been a great addition to the team, and as we really kind of blow up this vertical transportation industry, you being the leader of that is going to be really, really huge. So, yeah, definitely welcome to the team. And I obviously you've been here for a while, but this will be a great kickoff for you.
Are you interested in offering virtual CFO services at your firm or scaling your existing service offerings? The Virtual CFO Playbook, How to Land $60,000 a Year Clients and Provide a Killer Client Experience, is an online series of modules that will equip you with essential tools for creating and delivering scalable VCFO services. These approaches have helped Summit CPA grow from $500,000 to upwards of $5 million in revenue over the past decade. If you're ready to grow your firm, visit summitcpa.net/VCFO playbook to enroll now.
So Dan, maybe a little bit about transportation logistics for people who aren't familiar. As we talk about lots of companies, there's an awful lot of things that are similar from an accounting and finance perspective from company to company. And then there's things that are unique, and Summit currently has one specific digital that we focus on. What would you say are some of those unique things, and maybe help us understand sort of transportation versus logistics when you talk about those terms?
Yeah, and I use, I guess, different people use different terminology a little bit, but when I think of transportation, I'm thinking more of the company owning the asset. They have the truck, they have the driver, and they're controlling that asset, the tractor. So I think of transportation in those terms, which can be it can be a very complicated accounting model. There's a lot of moving parts, literally. You've got fuel, you've got driver wages, you've got repairs on the road. It's a challenging accounting environment, really it is. And a lot of, it's kind of an accountant nightmare from the standpoint, in my opinion. You have to give a lot of people access to cash that in theory, as an accountant, you just kind of cringe. Like, I can't give an operations person access to cash, but unless you want to get the call in the middle of the night, my truck's broke down, I need to issue a com check or key check, you have to relinquish some of those and put in the controls you can. So, and then I commonly refer to logistics more as non-asset based, a brokerage operation.
Okay.
Many companies have both. They have the assets, they have a transportation division, and then they have a logistics division. Some, one side dominates more than the other. In my past life, one of the companies was very heavy into the logistics side. Built that up from a 7-person operation to, I don't know, I think when I left, we were approaching 100 people. So, and then the other company was kind of the reverse of that. They were more heavy on the asset side and running their own trucks, and then started the logistics side as well. But obviously the asset side, you've got one of the challenges for a CFO is, in fact, was one of the first things that the company that I started with asked me, is you got so much capital. Right. I mean, a tractor anymore is, they've gone skyrocketing prices. So you've got a $150,000 tractor or more. You've got a trailer that can be $35,000, $40,000, $50,000. So you've got a lot of equipment tied up, and making those decisions on those capital acquisition decisions is, very harrowing for a business owner. You get 10, 15 tractors, you can be in a couple $1 million real fast.
And you can get into big banking relationships, big loans, things like that.
Absolutely.
I had mentioned to you one of my clients who owns some of his own trucks. This is a trucking firm, Jody, that I'm sure you're familiar with. And then he also does a lot of logistics for other clients. And Dan actually mentioned that the owner of that company was a driver at his company 20 years ago. Yeah. He goes, oh, really, him? And he decided to grow up and do that on his own. Kind of a cool business.
Yeah. It's a small world. The industry, I think there's over 500 trucking companies out there in the United States. And I think 80% of them are, 6 trucks or less. A lot of them are mom and pop. So as big as the industry is, you run into the same people frequently.
And significant growth over the last several years, right? As many of us have moved on to online shopping. And I mean, the Amazon trucks to our neighborhood are probably the most common vehicle seen more than people's home cars. I would imagine logistics has just exploded in the need and the industry.
For sure. With one of the huge challenges, obviously, is fuel. If you're not on top of monitoring your fuel from a cost standpoint and a pricing standpoint, you can be out of business real fast. So, the last couple of years have been very robust for the transportation industry. It came out of, as you and I were talking yesterday, Tom, it came out of COVID just with the, a firestorm. It really had a few months lapse and then came out and just ramped up literally. And companies that were poised to take advantage of that, really did. And a lot of companies have done really well over the last
as I mentioned, for this particular...
What do you think the outlook is kind of going forward?
Go ahead. The last point I was going to make, just to emphasize what Dan said, this client I had, as I mentioned to you, Dan, I think his business dropped by about 2/3, maybe even a little bit more around like March and April of 2020. And we were really trying to batten down the hatches. And probably by July, he was having the best months, and that continued month after month. So completely to your point, he was poised. He had what he thought was excess equipment, and he has had the best couple of years. But if he had not been in a position to take advantage of that, not enough trucks, let workers go, things like that, would have really been rough. And we did a lot with him sort of around forecasting and planning that helped that. And so he was really in a good position for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think forecasting, that's something that I thought I was doing a good job of it when I was in my past life. But, as I've come to Summit, I think that's definitely a strength that Summit has, is there's so much focus on forecasting, not only from the concept, but the tools that Summit brings to the table. And it's just such a focus of what we do here. And it's really exciting to get in and see all the tools we have to do a proper forecast, and not, I think forecasting in trucking a lot of times is what's next week look like.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity. Well, I know there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of business owners to really look at forecasting the way Summit does, and look out at, I think I've heard Jody talk about, Summit, the company looks out the next 10 years, but at least looking out at next year, next 2 years. And it's just imperative to do that, to analyze equipment purchases, analyze employment, bringing on new employees and so forth. What can you afford to bring on? And does it make sense to bring new employees on? Can you get more productivity? We analyze a lot. Can you get more productivity out of your existing workforce? So having that forecast and having some reality behind it, I think is imperative in any industry, but especially one that's as highly capital intensive as the transportation industry.
Yeah, and with the forecast, I think what the beauty of it is, it's not just the revenue side, right? It's not just what we're calculating for tax returns at the end of the year, what your net income is. It's more so on the cash position of the company. What does cash look like in 6 months from now? What does it look like a year from now? What does it look like 3 years from now? How much do I want to take out of the company as a business owner for distributions at the end of the year? How much can I take without hurting the company? Can I buy that truck, like you said, or can I give raises to my people, or, can I give them a more per mile, stipend? What are the different, the different things that can really modify or impact things? That's where I think that's right what you're talking about, right? That's what really gives the value to the business owner, because now they've got visibility in the future, not just kind of guessing. And I know as a business owner myself, guessing is horrible. You always think you're gonna outrun revenue, or you're gonna outrun expenses, or that giving an extra day's vacation is not really going to impact anything. When in reality, when you look at the numbers and you really dive in the non-financial numbers, non-financial indicator type stuff, you start to realize the impact that a small decision has. And it could be huge. It could be a positive impact, could be a negative.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's important part is you have to know, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've heard your analogy a few times, Jody, of, you want to go on a trip and you want to go to California, or you go to Florida or somewhere, and you kind of know the general direction you want to go, but you can either get in your car and just start driving and hope you get there and head west, and if you're going to California, or head south if you want to go to Florida, or you can have an actual roadmap, of how you want to get there and kind of plan it out. And not only plan it out from how I'm going to get there, but, what are the steps, how far am I going to go today and how far am I going to go tomorrow? So I love that analogy. And I think that's where the CFO can bring so much value to a company. I think there's so many decisions that, they usually have outgrown, and usually they start feeling anxious, is kind of my experience. They're like, okay, it doesn't feel right. I don't feel comfortable. I need to bounce this off of someone, and I need someone to give me some direction and let me know. Maybe I know the right decision, but I need someone to echo that. I need someone to confirm that with me and show me in writing. Here's what it does. Here's what it looks like.
Yeah, and having the background that you have is huge, right? Because you can speak the vernacular. You know the talk. You know exactly what a trucking industry is looking for, what logistics companies are looking for. You can give background that a traditional CFO may not be able to give. Or even so, if you have got a company with a CFO that's been there forever, they're kind of isolated in their own bubble, right? They only know what they know, and they only have the company kind of background. But when you can bring in other companies and bring in other industry information, I think it's huge and valuable, especially for the small to medium sized trucking companies out there that would love to be able to afford a $300,000 CFO to be on staff, and you really can't afford that. So we're looking for an alternative.
Well, I think one of the things that I've enjoyed most about Summit, other than your Hawaiian shirts, I do enjoy those.
Thank
Is that
you. We didn't mention your shirt.
Not? No, I'll make sure we edit out the comment about Jody's shirt.
I think one of the things I've enjoyed, oddly enough, is, we're going to have to cut this out of recording because I don't want any evidence of it. I'm not the smartest one here. I
don't think
I finally had to relinquish that. There's a lot of smart people in the company. And one of the things I enjoy is the most is the collaboration. I mean, there are very few times that you can't find someone who has seen something either within Summit or within Anders. I've picked so many CFOs' brains. I've picked some of our senior advisors' brains and stuff. And I love our Friday meetings where we collaborate on those things and bring those ideas to the table. And we've got other people with transportation experience as well in the company that can bring a lot of value.
I think that's a huge advantage that many of my clients had mentioned, that when they'll say, have you seen other companies doing? And because we work with multiple companies, we do. And it's really difficult if you're in a company. You can read and you can do conferences and things, but if you're actually working with multiple companies across there, it's surprising how often within the same month, each company is kind of dealing with a similar kind of thing as things go through cycles. And it's pretty fun to say, okay, I just had to deal with this with someone else, and another client is addressing the same thing to already have some kind of a solution in there. Related.
Right. I brought in another, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I
brought in another CFO and I'm eating the other day, and she was immediately able to say, because she has a wealth of experience in that industry, this is what I typically see. And they're like, well, this is what we do. And she was able to say, okay, but I've never seen anyone else do that. You can do it that way, but brought that comfort level, and not in a condescending way, kind of reassuring, giving them affirmation of, this is a decision I recommend, and this is what I've seen with a lot of clients. What you're doing, I'm not saying it's wrong. I just haven't seen it before, and I'm not sure what the value is there. So I think having those resources at our fingertips is excellent.
Dan, you mentioned, and we talk a lot about key performance indicators for companies and KPIs. I'd love if you talk a little bit about, when you talk about a transportation logistics company, what those might be. And for people listening, I think it's easy to say, yes, KPIs are important. Sometimes it's difficult to say, okay, if I'm industry specific, what might some of those be? So be a great example. Can you talk a little bit about logistics and transportation? What are KPIs?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a huge believer in key performance indicators. I think it's a crying shame if you shouldn't be surprised what your month looks like.
Right.
I think if you're watching your key performance indicators daily, I used to watch them hourly. I mean, trucking, literally, you've got, oh my goodness, we had in my past life, we had a dashboard and it refreshed every hour. Wow. And I became obsessed with watching that. And not only did I watch it, we had it out for all of our people to see, so they could see how they were doing. They loved it. They loved to see, their numbers. They loved to see how the company was doing. And we would spearhead, some competitions with them and stuff. So they would see, where their gross profit was for the month, what their individual activity was and performance was. So I think key performance indicators are I think they're a must. In fact, I used to tell the owner, I said, you don't even need to look at your financials to see how you had, what kind of month you had. Number one, you can walk around your yard to see how many empty trucks or how many trucks are out on the road. That's a good indicator right off the bat. Right. But we had a lot of key management reports we'd run. Some of them in the trucking industry. On the transportation side, are more asset based. What's your revenue per truck is probably one of the key indicators. Again, you're monitoring utilization. The terminology may change from industry to industry, but it's the same concepts we use for most of our clients. So average revenue per truck, per day, per week, per month. Average revenue per driver, same thing. How many unseated trucks you have? What's your capacity? Revenue per mile, obviously, is another one. Obviously, monitoring that. And what's important, and we've seen this with some of our clients, is as we take over the client, is to get the accounting right. right? So you can say, oh, I thought my revenue was per truck was X amount, but if it's loaded with stuff that shouldn't be in the actual revenue number, you're kidding yourself.
Yeah.
You know, so I think garbage in, garbage out. So it's critical to have the key performance indicator, but it's also critical to have the accounting accurate, so that the key performance indicators are accurate and you're comparing the right numbers. On the logistics side, you're monitoring more performance per employee, gross profit per employee, per day, per month, per week. You're averaging how many shipments they move. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to move a shipment and you lose money on it. You're servicing the customer. Right. It's kind of your loss leader. And in my childhood, we had a grocery store, and you have your loss leaders, in your store, and we've got certain projects at Summit, that are more profitable than others, and same in trucking. So you may have a client or a customer, you move 50 loads a week, and 2 or 3 of them you lose money on. So monitoring the number of shipments that a person handles, regardless of whether they made profit or not, monitoring the number of losses you take. It's kind of a trick bag, because if you're not taking enough losses, you're probably not taking enough gambles. So you're probably getting too conservative and not servicing the client enough, and you're only cherry picking the loads. So monitoring all those statistics can give you some really key insight to how you're doing. And again, at the end of the month, there really shouldn't be a surprise. You should be able to pretty well determine whether you're profitable or not, and how profitable.
And I think adding to that, Tom, excuse me, Tom, here, but adding to that, everything that you've mentioned there goes into that forecast. That's how we build the forecast, right? So the forecast isn't built by saying, hey, what'd you do last month? And I'm going to increase that by 10%. And we're magically going to get there. Let's roll the dice and hope it works. It's everything that Dan just mentioned. We build it into that forecast on what we know is going to happen, or what we plan on having based on the capacity of what we have available. So if we've got 10 trucks, what are those 10 trucks going to do at full capacity? Then we back into the next 3 months based on what we do have in our pipeline. So we have to maybe bring it down or bring it up a little bit based on what we know is under contract and what we know is coming down the road. And that's the beauty of it, right? And so you're always building towards capacity, and so you'll know pretty much when you can make those decisions and when they can't be. And it's important to use those non-financials. And so I can see right now where Dan's going with, he builds this really cool forecast, and then all the KPIs are kind of tied to that forecast. And so that as an owner, we know if we're going to hit our numbers or not, because before we even get the financials done, like Dan mentioned, because we already know, because we didn't have the amount of trucks come through that we needed to, or the amount of loads or whatever it is, or we took losses on certain things that we didn't need to take or weren't expecting to take, that type of thing. And that's the beauty of it, I guess, is that we can really kind of build that and work along that and do a lot of modeling with it.
Right. I think capacity is what we're talking about, right? So the one owner I work with, he was a dreamer. I want to be so big, and he always had his foot on the pedal to do that, and that was fun. And I used to ask him, okay, we don't have the capacity to do that. We don't have the people. It sounds like a great, and I'm on board, but let's figure out a plan to get to that capacity to do that, to put some numbers behind it. And then this is how many people we're going to need to hire, and this is the productivity we need to expect out of them. And we always, I'm a believer in, in my opinion, the 4 pillars. You talk about your culture, you talk about your people, so you can get better people, better trained people. You can leverage your technology, and you can leverage your processes. So if you focus on those, you can get more out of your capacity. You can increase your utilization, and from booking 4 shipments a day to maybe 6 shipments a day. So you look at all those opportunities, which is what we do with a lot of our clients. Say, all right, your utilization or your effectiveness is probably not up to industry standards. So what can we do to boost you up? It's not what we see with our other clients. Let's focus on that.
Dan, when you worked in operations, I'm curious, how did that impact or influence your relationship with the non-financial metrics? I would assume now you're not just reporting, but you're living in it. Did that make a big impact on you?
Yeah, I was instrumental in, building out that dashboard. Obviously I had the finance background, and I got with some key people within our division, and they were a lot smarter than me, which isn't saying much. And I had them build out some really cool dashboards and got them excited about seeing our numbers every day, and turned it into, we didn't use it to criticize. We used it to encourage our people. There's a big difference. And it was amazing because we increased our productivity so much, and we set goals. Their average, our average gross profit was X when we started, and we thought we could really bolster that. And we did. We increased it by 2.5 times just by, leveraging our technology, by monitoring it, and by expecting more out of our people. But they saw those numbers every day. They were constantly in front of them. And then we programmed our KPIs. So not only did the whole floor, the ownership was seeing them, and they knew the ownership was seeing their activity. And, we've gauged not only their activity, but their productivity. And usually they're hand in hand. But, sometimes you might have a person who's really struggling and they're putting in the effort, just struggling with productivity. So it's important for us. It was important to measure both. So we could see your productivity is low, but your activity is also low. So they go hand in hand. What can we do to bolster your activity? And we think if you do that, your productivity will go up.
Are the measures you were talking about, are those pretty common across the industry that you can then compare to some industry metrics as well? They are.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Gross profit per person is, a key metric. In the logistics side, some companies they call it crate to cradle. Where one person handles both the customer side and the transportation side. They handle both sides of the model. In a lot of larger industries, they have a split model where you've got one side dealing with the customer and one side dealing with the trucking company on the logistics side. But yeah, the metrics are pretty uniform. They're not a lot of new stuff in trucking. There's not a lot of new metrics and everything. Some may dive in and get a little more granular on monitoring CRM activity and stuff like that, and get a little more detailed on it. But the basic metrics are
I found real power in that industry metric. And, one in our niche, one of them is average bill rate, but there's so many of my clients that they are not charging enough. And when you can say, when they tell you I can't charge more, it's too competitive, all these things, you're like, the average is like $30 an hour more than you're charging. And that really influences them. And I had one recently, I'd said it for a long time. Then luckily he went to a conference and came back and said, we're not charging enough. And I said, I've been telling you that, but luckily he heard it from someone else and now he wants to charge more. But just the power when they realize someone else can do something better than what they're seeing really motivates.
Oh, for sure.
Can we take a quick break here, Tom, real quick? And I'd like to get an idea. I'm a real book reader. I like to read books, and I've got favorite books. I was wondering, Tom, if we could each share our favorite book and why real quick here for our listeners. Go ahead, Tom.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. One I'll have, in fact, let me grab it so you can see it. It's one that I just reread again, and so I'll hold it up so people can see it. This Getting Things Done by David Allen is one that people can see, and it's a really good one for sort of keeping track of what you're supposed to be doing, putting it in a place so that you'll take action on it, and it's made a huge impact on me feeling like I can get control of what things we're doing.
Absolutely. I like that book, Tom. I think mine, and we had a lot of our managers read it at the one company, is Good to Great.
Sure, Jim Collins.
Great. Oh, I've got that here too.
Yeah. That was kind of our Bible, and we referenced that a lot in our values and stuff. And I think two big focuses on that were getting the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. I think both are equally as important. And then the hedgehog concept, do what you do well, and focus on that and say, this is probably not us. That's a great opportunity for someone, probably not us. So I really enjoy that book. I think it's, and probably a third concept is, which I think we can relate to as accountants, is facing the brutal facts. And I think sometimes that's something that I think we should preach to our clients is, we got to get a solution for, the next, 12 weeks of your cash flow and so forth. Here's where you are, and burying your head in the sand is not going to get you out of that. So I think facing the brutal facts is probably my third concept. That's excellent. Book that I really take to. What about you, Jody?
Yeah, Good to Great.
Yes.
One of my favorite books. I probably list. I have multiple medias of that book. I've got it on
Oh, do
CD. I've
you?
got it on, media. I've got it on tape. I've got that book in hard copy. It's like Jesus Christ. I've read everything on that book and read it many times. So that was something that we really kind of formed our business. Really helped us really kind of get through the tough stuff. eMyth was another
Yes.
one that we used. Because it's all about process,
Mhm.
right? Because you want to make a repeatable process. That's the only way you can really grow and give everybody that same level. Because when we like with our CFOs, we want Tom, when he's meeting with clients, we want that client getting that same experience with Tom than that they're going
Right.
to get with Dan. And it's really hard to do
Mhm.
that if you don't have processes in place. And so we're
Right.
huge on processes, which kind of leads me
Agreed.
to a book I recently read, which is this
I've read
Pinnacle
that
book.
as well.
And it's a great book called The Five Principles That Take Your Business to the top of the mountain, by Steve Prada and Greg Cleary. I know Greg really, really well. And this is an operations book. So it's really, what do we have to do to kind of get through, and it really focuses on people, kind of like the pillars you'd mentioned: purpose, playbook, performance, and then profits, and we're
Mhm.
the profit part of that,
Mhm.
which is
Right.
kind of cool. So it gives all four of the different areas that, as a business owner, no matter if you're in the trucking industry or if you're in the cannabis industry or whatever, you really have to have that solid foundation. And that's kind of
Absolutely.
what that book is really focusing on, is that. And so I'm glad to hear what all three of yours. I mean, Getting Things Done, super
Yes.
great book on how to manage
Right.
your time. That's a big thing that we find that, the success or failure of our CFOs really comes down to
Right.
managing time. It does.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, can you imagine can you imagine letting your time manage you as a
Oh,
CFO? And how would you handle
Yeah.
15 different clients if your time was
I agree
managing you?
completely.
I mean,
Right. Right.
that would be
I'm thinking of
horrible.
our CPAs who
And
listen, right? I mean, how often do CPAs say there's no longer a busy time of the year? It's always busy. All these clients calling, and it only takes one or two dropped messages or phone calls from someone until you're really dealing with something that's falling apart. And I agree with you, Jody.
Right. Right.
yeah,
And I
it's
forgot
like,
to mention, Jody,
yeah, yeah.
Digital Dollars and Cents is probably my peak book. I mean,
Oh, well, I got
I
that
gotta
one
go
too.
there.
That one's here.
I've
That is
got
an
that right
excellent
here,
one.
actually.
It's
There you
Jody. Is
go.
it Grunden?
And who's
Grunden, I think
There
is
you
the
the
go.
name.
author
Oh,
on that
Grunden.
one?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. There were a lot of misspellings in it, but once you got past the misspellings, it was pretty good.
That has been an excellent.
No, that was
No, seriously, all kidding aside, there's a lot of pragmatic advice in there, and I think that's one of the things I enjoy about Summit is I enjoy the cadence, which
Mhm.
is I think we've got kind of like you're talking about processes.
Mhm.
Yep.
We have a deliberate cadence of delivering information to clients, and I think we rarely veer from that, and I think that's really critical.
Mhm.
And clients really, in my experience here, they really enjoy
Yes.
that. They
Yep.
enjoy, yeah, I'm busy, but I got to have my meeting, with Summit this week just to keep on track.
Yep.
And just to know that we're looking over your receivables, your payables, your processes and stuff. So, I think the cadence and the process of doing that is critical. And I agree. I love Summit's model of 80% of what we do is scaled, right? This is the way we do it. And then you got 20%. You got to allow that individual CFO or advisor to
Mhm.
come in and
Yep.
share your experience and give a little twist on it. But the overall delivery of the service is, uniform. So if Tom jumped in on one of my clients or I jumped in, I would pretty well be able to pick
Mhm.
up and say, I know where Tom is on this. There's
Mhm.
no real big surprises. And I think same with,
Right.
with
Mhm.
all of us. We're pretty
You,
interchangeable.
you mentioned
Yeah.
the cadence, Dan. For people listening who kind of wonder what we do with clients, and you also talked about the importance of forecasting. Do you want to talk a little bit about what a cadence maybe for a month looks like for your typical client?
Yeah, we just took on a new client after I started. They've really been
Uh-huh.
fun to work with. It's a quasi new business, but they're assuming a large book of business that
Okay.
they've been handling. So we have a cadence with them. We meet every
Mm-hmm.
week. We walk through their cash flow every
Mm-hmm.
week. And during that cash flow meeting, we're not only talking about where their cash is currently, we're looking out for the next 12 weeks or so at what their cash is going to look like. So there's
Yep.
no surprises. That gives them, they can sleep
Uh-huh.
at night. That little 10-minute conversation with them, like, okay, we know where we are. They can put that off their plate and they can focus on running
Mm-hmm.
their business instead of, getting caught with a surprise, kind of what you were alluding to, Tom. of surprise, like, oh, we don't have cash for payroll or something like that. And then we deliver, depending on the client, forecasting meetings every week, pipeline meetings where we're reviewing what they've got, coming through in sales and so forth. And then their financial meeting as well, going over their financials and reviewing those in detail and answering any questions and comparing them to their, looking at their KPIs and saying, here's how you did, and here's probably why. And again, they're at in, some industries, their average bill rate was down or was up or whatever, or their utilization was down or was up. So again, shouldn't be any surprises from that if they're monitoring those pretty carefully.
Yeah, that's great. I know a common.
So it sounds like I didn't hear accounting in there. What's the deal? I didn't financial statements once. Really?
Yeah. And I think that's it's fun to stay on track with the client that way. It's like we're programmed, that you've got those meetings set out for, months in advance. The client knows it, not that we don't change occasionally, but we pretty well stick to that recurring meeting. And again, my experience with those clients is, okay, they had their meeting. Now they can put that to rest and they know what they need to focus on and they know they've got good, clean financials to look at. They know they got the forecast laid out. They know where they're going. They know the roadmap, and now they need to execute the plan.
Yeah, that sounds like a great. And I know many of our new clients coming in know that they should be doing things like reviewing financial statements, talking about forecast, and they don't have that. So just putting that in place, they at least know there's a way. When they're thinking forecast and thinking, I've had in my mind that I probably should be hiring 2 more people in the office to do something. Forecast is a perfect part of that conversation to say, let's show you what that looks like if that's what you're doing. And that once they've got that in place, there can be some kind of, they can relax for those kind of things. Or when things really look like they're taking an ugly turn, that you're in there saying, well, let's build 2 or 3 different models. What if it does get as bad as you're thinking? And what if it doesn't? And just how would we get through that? And that's so much easier to do on paper before just jumping in and saying, let me just wing it and figure out kind of what's going to happen. So I'm glad you do that.
Yeah, and then figuring it out after the fact, right? And,
well, I think about even when going through the pandemic. It was such a when you hear the industry, because I speak to a lot of folks in the accounting industry, and it was like basically everybody's basically emergency right now. Everybody's changing what they're doing. They're meeting with clients more often, and they're really kind of working through it. And a lot of the accounting firms did a phenomenal job with it. With us, it was like business as usual. We met with clients maybe one more time. The clients already had a really good understanding of their position anyways, and it was just more modeling. Hey, here's what we do if this client leaves. What if this client leaves? What's the worst case scenario? If we have to lay off all these people, what do I have to do cash wise? All of that was already in place, and so it was just more of a check in. Hey, let's see. I just want to check in real quick. It wasn't a mad dash and scramble. Everybody in the firm and all the clients, all hysteric. It was more of a, hey, now how does this impact things? And it was just a different conversation.
Well, the way we coach, I love Summit's process of coaching clients through having a cash reserve. That's exactly what that's for, having a tax reserve account, so there aren't surprises. And you need to plan for those, those events. The economy is going to change, things are going to happen, and being prepared for those. And talking about, and you hit it right on the head, Jody, you're talking about that ahead of time versus, it happened. No one could have prepared for a pandemic like we went through, but at least we were, you prepare clients for moderately what they're looking at, and you have a game plan, and you're definitely ahead of the game. You're definitely not scrambling as much as, I have no risk cash reserve. We've never talked about this before. Right. And having that laid out for a client just so, we have conversations with clients. What would happen if you didn't have any billable revenue for the next 3 months, 6 months? What would that look like for you? And clients want to know that. I think be'll tell them that.
That's a great point.
Well, even worse, when's the best time to get a line of credit? It's when things are going well, not during a recession. So for those folks that think there's a recession coming up, you better have that line of credit already in place, because you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it when it happens. And so.
The one client I worked with, that was one of the first things we talked about when we took them over is line of credit. And 1,000% agree is the effective time to do that is when you don't need it.
Yep.
And they kept, we're not going to need a line of credit. We're not going to need a line of credit. And I kept Okay. And finally, about a month before they needed it, they're like, yeah, we need a line of credit. Can you get that up? And there was a large line of credit we had to get established. And fortunately, I'd already had conversations with a few banks and stuff. And the client felt really comfortable, said, go with your people, you know them, get the ball rolling. And the process went really smoothly because we had already had those conversations. I had already started the groundwork and already, I knew what the bank was going to require. I knew what the bank was going to lend them and so forth, and was able to start putting together a forecast for them, to show them what their cash was going to look like. Mm-hmm. And it would not have been pretty if they didn't have a line of credit.
Yeah.
So.
What you've described is so, I think, telling around. About 80% of what we do is very common across businesses and what everyone needs.
Oh, absolutely.
And you've emphasized the 20% as we've talked more about specific to logistics and transportation, the value that you can bring knowing that industry. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a great kind of place to wrap up and say, just knowing those two things is so good. And I hope anyone listening says that 80% I could do. Maybe I'm not in logistics, but I can at least hear how Dan's helped me think through what would some of those key performance indicators and why they're important to be in there. So
Exactly.
I really appreciate you sharing that knowledge with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Looking
I hope you have.
forward to diving in.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you guys soon.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website at summitcpa.net to get more tips and strategies for achieving modern CPA firm success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.